Hello and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. My name is Pat Burnham, and I am joined right now by Osceola editor Bob Ferrante. We have Kurt Weiler is going to join us in a few minutes. He's straight back from FSU's baseball game in Gainesville, and he's got actually an interesting anecdotal story to tell us about his post-game adventures in Gainesville. And then we'll have Nick Carlisle join us on the back end of the show, talk a little bit about who was at practice from a recruiting standpoint yesterday and some of the kids that he talked to. But Bob, how's your beautiful Wednesday afternoon in Tallahassee going? I mean, this is the Chamber of Commerce, 75 degrees, a big blazing sun up in the sky, and absolutely not one cloud out today.
I like spring. I like spring with less pollen. It feels like we've kind of survived the height of pollen, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I'm hoping the pollen's gone because it's been intense over here the last couple of weeks. And Bob and I live about 3 miles from each other. It's been pretty bad in our neighborhood this spring. All right, so Bob, this may be one of our shorter shows because Mike didn't really say a whole lot after practice yesterday, but we will talk about some of the things he said. And listen, you were there for his press conference. I was not. I listened to all of it this morning. Clearly just pleased with practice number 10. I thought his body language was pretty good for him, given the fact that he was upset. But what was your takeaway from his opening statement? That clearly that it did not go. He did not get the response from a Tuesday practice that he thought he might get after what he thought was a fairly productive scrimmage on Saturday.
I think Mike Norvell wants a practice to build off of a scrimmage where, let's say they have Sunday off and Monday they're going through the film and they're, kind of making the corrections in their minds and then going out there on Tuesday and doing it better. I think he was frustrated. He was distracted, I think, at times as questions were being asked. It was a little bit of a different Mike Norvell until he really got engaged. Not just talking about up and down of a practice, but really saying it was a team that didn't have an edge. Right. And this has been the Mike Norvell word I think we've heard, again, since going back to mid-February when he's in Orlando. He has talked about being desperate and desperately needing an edge and needing to see that and not seeing it last year. And I think we've consistently praised him for going out there and saying that, for not being apologetic, but going right up to that edge, kind of literally, and saying, of course, it didn't have an edge last year. For him to say it pretty adamantly, I thought Tuesday night was telling. In the big picture, are we supposed to make a big deal out of this? I don't think so, because I think he did kind of recover later, and he talked about, in the totality of 10 practices, it's been better. So I think he did kind of recover eventually, but his emotion walking off the field, I do think, kind of just poured out, Pat.
Yeah, and listen, I think that you hit on something. I think sometimes we make too much out of one given practice for a particular individual. Now, if it's a total team effort where you just need to blow the whistle, send them back in the locker room, and which they don't do anymore because of the 20-hour rule, but back in the day, you'd get sent back in the locker room, start practice over, those kind of things. But listen, I've said it before, particularly, and I was guilty of it. I've been guilty of it. I think everybody that covers the team is guilty of it. Sometimes we make too much out of one practice for one player. Listen, you got 105 guys on this roster. You're in the 10th practice of spring, which for these guys seems like it's gone on forever. And I watch practice. I'm like, well, this practices aren't as tough as they were back in the day, and there's less of them. And why can't they do this? But everything's relative, right? So yeah, sometimes I think we make too much. And listen, you're typically coming off a physical scrimmage. Your next practice is probably not going to be as sharp. And he mentioned that there were some guys that were making concerted effort to continue to improve, and then but it was a very generalized statement, right? There weren't any examples. He did not say, hey, Tommy Castellanos is doing everything he can, but Brock Glenn's not. I mean, we didn't get any of that, so it's really hard to know, particularly since we're not there. At least when we were going to practice back last year, we could, if he made a generalized statement like that, we might be able to narrow on who he was talking about, good or bad, because we would see the interaction during practice, right? So, yeah, I think sometimes we, listen, I played high school and college, and there were days where I went out to the practice field and, just didn't have it. I mean, for whatever reason, beat up, tired of it in the middle of the season. But yeah, but he was clearly just pleased. And he listened, he even said, and he mentioned both sides of the ball. It sounded like the defense kind of started off rough based on what he said, and came back and responded well towards the end of practice. And and we've heard Mike talk about, that's generalizations that we typically hear. Now, one of the things that I know he said it before, he typically, though, Bob, in my recollection, has always kind of held this to a bad result at the end of a game, after a game, and talking about the coaching staff, and the coaching staff has to do a better job. Now, I think that this is, and I don't think I've ever heard him say it after a practice. Now, that's why I'm pointing out what he said. Do you recall him saying this after any particular practice over the course of 5 years? He said it. He said it after games before, and he usually refers to himself as, I've got to do a better job. But this is the first time I can remember him saying anything about the coaching staff, certainly this spring, and the first time I can remember saying it after a practice. But what was your takeaway from that?
Yeah, I think that did kind of perk up my ears for a minute there, and I think, let's go back to, these are guys who need to be accountable and need to be leaders too. I think, I think one of the questions even too was, well, how did the players respond? And we've asked that of a lot of players, not just Tuesday night, but in general
Right.
this spring. When things aren't going well, when things go south, who do you turn to? Who is a leader? And at times we hear, for example, Tommy Castellanos is one of those guys. Hey, we're not going to accept that kind of, not using the term standard. We're not going to accept that here. We got to ramp it up. So I don't want to say that there's not enough leadership, but I think the coaches are, kind of saying, we have to foster that accountability. We have to foster those relationships and that leadership, and make sure that it's holding the players accountable out there. I'm fine if coaches want to kind of wear it to some extent and say we have to be better as coaches. Sure, that's fine. Whether you're a new coach or whether you're from last year, but I think in the end, at some point, I wish we could talk to maybe more players after these practices. I'd like to hear, a Luke Pettibon. Hey, we just got to grind it out. It's a tough spring. It's practice 10. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep fighting to the 19th. I kind of want to hear a little bit more of those older voices, whether you've been on the roster or you're new. I think we'd get a little bit of a different flavor as far as just, what does that push sound like? How does it drive some of these newer guys,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and listen, on the coaching thing, I think maybe his new view of practice, being able to take in maybe he is watching the coaches more and evaluating the coaches more, and
Yep.
because he's got more time to spend in other position groups outside of the quarterback. And because when he was offensive coordinator and head coach, he typically stayed with the offense and typically stayed around the quarterbacks. So I think maybe, and we talked about it some last year, and we felt like maybe some of these coaches were not coaching as hard as they had done in previous years, and maybe Mike was so tied up. So I think it gives him a new perspective. Now, one of the reasons I was a little bit surprised by that, because he does have two walking bosses on both sides of the ball. Malzahn does not coach a position. Tony White does not coach a position. And now, listen, I think maybe I think and he mentioned that he felt like that was working out, like the coordinators. He felt like he's never had walking coordinator, what I call walking bosses before as coordinators. He felt like it's working out pretty good, and that's got to be a different dynamic for him because now you got three guys, himself and his two coordinators, that can walk around and to any drill they want. Obviously, they're staying on their sides of the ball from the coordinator positions. But yeah, so I think that was interesting. I don't think I've ever heard him call out the coaches in practice, and I'm not saying he was calling them out in a negative way. I don't mean that. I think he was just saying, hey, it was not our best day across the board, and that is players and coaches alike. And so that was interesting. I think how he addresses this is a new dynamic, right? I mean, so how does he go into Gus's office and say, Gus, you got to get your boys going?
The challenge for Gus, I mean, Gus looks kind of worn out on Saturdays when we talk to him because the OL injuries, the wide receiver injuries, I mean, they've kind of leaned into it and mentioned it. We can discuss it. I think Gus is really maxing out the hand that he has, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he knows the hand that he's got. They're leaning hard on Javon Boggs, right? I mean, they know who Javon is because Gus had him as a commit on the UCF end. So I think they're leaning on guys, but to some extent, I think with certain position groups in particular, OL and then receiver especially, I think they're pushing even harder and just saying, hey, this is your opportunity. I think we heard Norvell talk about that too, that some guys are maxing out these opportunities and some guys were giving them the opportunity and it's not being seen by us. So I think that clearly was part of the frustration that I read through Mike Norvell's, words of, hey, your number is called for a reason because of an injury potentially. And it didn't feel right in his view.
Yeah. And listen, we got to ask a question by Trenton. Do you think it's an effort or execution when addressing the lack of edge? To me, effort and edge go hand in hand. You can execute your assignment, your technique without physicality. You can be technically sound, but not physical enough. So Trenton, that would be my answer to that question. I think edge is more of a mentality and effort thing than it is an execution thing. You can having an edge, that means to me you have a physical hardcore football mentality and you're suited up and you're ready to go that day and you're going to knock the living crap out of whoever's in front of you. You're not going to take any SHIT off of them, all that kind of stuff. You're just not going to do it. And so that's what it means to me. Now listen, I think, we've had a couple days to marinate, and on the offensive line, it's, he has not told us the names, but listen, four of my projected five starters are out. I wrote an offensive line preview before spring started, so you can go see who I have projected and and hear who we talked about and who we didn't talk about and figure it out. But the good news there, I think, and we probably did not make a big enough of emphasis on this on Monday's show. But listen, here's the thing. It's a double-edged sword. You would like for these experienced guys to get reps in Gus's offense, but at the end of the day, from an individual player standpoint, they know who those guys are, right? They've got the film. There's enough body of evidence that they know what those four gentlemen can do, and that's probably one of the reasons that they are holding them out, right? Because Florida State does need to start developing these young offensive linemen, and we've seen them. We mentioned some of the guys that were improved. We saw from younger guys that impressed us with Mario Nash, and he mentioned Jonathan Daniels post practice today or yesterday, and so there are some guys that need those extra reps. And listen, if one of these guys goes down in the fall that we projected to start, these extra reps they're getting in the spring will prove beneficial. So there's two ways to look at it. But yes, I do think that there's probably a bit of frustration that they can't really look at their full potential because these guys are either banged up to the point that they can't practice or they don't want to practice them for whatever reason. And we know that there's more load management in college football than it ever has been before. But yeah, so I think there's two ways to look at that. Now, he did mention some post scrimmage stuff. Obviously, it was the first time we'd met with him since the post scrimmage, and he did mention that the one deficit he felt like on offense was the inability to finish drives and not did not have enough explosive plays. Now, I will say this. He kind of came back and said, well, we might, and I think I'm paraphrasing what he said because he was asked a question about offense, and he said, kind of felt like maybe he had blown the ball dead too early on some quarterback runs that would have been big plays. I know one Castellanos kind of questioned, why did you blow the whistle? I could have beat that guy around the edge. And so I think in retrospect, he found some more big plays, had those quarterbacks actually been live. So that was interesting. And then listen, he talked about defense eliminating explosive plays, forced 2 turnovers. It looks like there was an actual fumble now in retrospect. I heard him mention that. So Gus is going to be upset. He said it was hard to see, but you can find it. But listen, I have never heard Mike use the term violence before. And we've been covering Mike since the day he stepped on campus. I think that he knows last year's football team was a soft football team, and I think he is trying to send that message to his players and using other words. But we've got to be more violent. We've got to chase the ball better. Both those words have to do with a mentality, a physicality, and obviously an effort issue. So what were your takeaways from what he said about the defense?
Yeah, I think a little bit of there is a non-apology apology, right?
Right.
It's hey, we've got to be better, and Mike can't go through an off season kind of excusing away 2-10, but he can point to areas where Florida State needs to be better. And we've hit on edge, we've hit on accountability and leadership, we've hit on physicality. That's been a off-season storyline. We knew that this defense had to force more turnovers, had to be more aggressive in those areas. You guys saw it Saturday at the scrimmage. I mean, there were opportunities there. There were forced takeaways there, not just kind of those gimme throws that were just bad throws, right? So I think it's got to be tough too. Is like I see not just an offense that's shorthanded, but I see an offense. You hear Gus talk about penalties, you hear Mike talk about penalties, and how those penalties contributed to drives that aren't coming through. So I'm picturing like an offense that's in a bad down and distance situation, and the defense with Darrell Jackson and company is kind of salivating out there, going, okay, let's bring it on 3rd and long. So I think the defense is doing what it should be doing when the offense is maybe not as efficient as it should be, and maybe so many new pieces just kind of does the self-inflicted wounds. I think that's what you want to see, though. Like, the defense should be ahead of the offense.
Yep, we talk
That's
about
the way the offseason almost always goes. But yeah, like, be a big bad defense. Like, just go out there and kind of dictate it. And I think to a lot of extents we're hearing that.
Yeah, and of course, listen, they are, and some of this, and to go back to what Trenton asked, some of this may be Trenton, the lack of edge. If you really want to look at it in its totality, maybe a kid's not sure what he's supposed to be doing, so maybe because this is a new system, and because they're practicing 105 kids, so he's making very generalized statements. He doesn't point out any one position group or any one player. But if you're a kid that does not know what to do assignment wise, you're certainly not going to play with an edge. So there could be a little bit more to read into that. We always talk, these coaches say a lot, and sometimes I've said this before, sometimes they say too much, and they, instead of being direct and just getting to the point, we get all these coaching terms and coach speak. But he said something, and we always play what he said. What did we hear? He said something that kind of caught me off guard. And he was talking about how they were going to be able to evaluate certain players. is what basically is what we are seeing the real thing. And I can't remember whether he was talking about the Desir brothers or the quarterbacks. But anyway, he said, as we continue to elevate the competition. All right. So to me, of course, I'm more of a cynic or whatever you want to call it. But as we continue to elevate the competition, you're in practice 10. Why is the competition still being elevated? What does that mean? Is he talking about it'll be elevated when they're all his guys are back in there? Or are they not practicing as hard? I mean, to me, you just stay away from that, right? Because it creates questions, particularly coming off a 2-10 season. At practice 10, your competition in practice should be as elevated as it has been. I mean, you don't get but 15 practices. This to me is, out of all the things he said, that is the most concerning thing to me. Why isn't practice as elevated in competition as it should be? I mean, you got 15 chances, and we've heard Mike when he first got here, we're never going to waste a minute of any practice. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. We hear all those little platitudes and statements. And so to me, that was the one thing he said on Tuesday that I was like, all right, well, I don't really understand why you would say that. How did you take that?
Yeah, I'm not saying this to excuse it, to reason it. I think part of it is they want to push the tempo, like on offense, for example.
Yep.
They just feel like they can't. You can't get into sixth gear when you have so many new pieces and you're still kind of in that third, well, can we go to fourth gear type of thing. I think, it's one thing for us to say, okay, if you're new to an offensive scheme, if you're new to a defensive scheme, well, you've studied it, practice fast, and at least make a mistake going fast. I think we can say that and coaches can say it, but when a player gets out there in the field, sometimes it's, oh, wait a minute. And then you've lost that, not just edge, it's that immediacy of, let me just go play this game fast. So again, I'm not excusing it. I just think there's so much new out there. I think there are some injuries on offense. It's impacting a lot of things. It is interesting talking points again.
Yeah.
Early April.
Yeah.
It's hard because again, like Pat, if we had a reference practice 1 to Saturday that you guys saw, and then to that scrimmage on the 19th, we would have reference points to compare. But this is kind of the bummer of not having these individual kind of benchmarks.
Yeah, and listen, I'm really hoping, and I know that Derek said something about before we started the practice that we'll see how coverage goes as far as what it leads to with the media moving down the road. I do listen, and I've told you guys this before as a staff. I'd almost have access to the 3 preseason scrimmages than I would every single practice during fall camp. But I really hope that, and I said on Tom and Keith's show earlier today, everything we said is really good or bad about this football team is honestly an overreaction or an uneducated reaction because we don't have another point to validate any of this. Now, the only things that we could validate coming out of the scrimmage were, all right, they've been really positive about Amari Williams. And yes, Amari Williams looked good. And they've been very positive about Earl Little, and Earl Little really looked good. So we got to validate some of the things they've said, but we got to validate nothing with our own eyes. So I'm really hoping that we get a surprise. Like I think it was last Wednesday we found out we we're going to go to the scrimmage. I would love in about 5 seconds for a Yahoo Mail to pop up saying, hey, each media organization is going to get 2 passes for this spring. Now, I know I wouldn't get to go if that was the case because I used my free pass last week. But I think it, I hope that maybe after, and I have not read everybody's coverage because I don't subscribe to any of the other sites, but I would hope that maybe because of the way we covered it, and I think we did it professionally and the way they wanted it to be done, I would hope that they would let us back in for another practice before spring is out. But listen, it's going around. Shane Beamer was on Twitter this morning or last night, and he was getting all over the his press because they were reporting things that weren't true, but they weren't at that practice. They were getting it from third-party sources, which every site that covers Florida State is doing. So I hope that we can reach a middle ground, that we can come in and have more our own validation, because I do think that, and I know that nobody over there thinks that right now coming off that season, but I think this is one of the most program friendly media bases in the country. And so I hope he'll let us back in. But yeah, so it was interesting to see what he said about the spring. Now, I know, Bob, that it's the 10th practice spring when we start getting questions like, how does Jake Weinberg's strength of leg change your end of game philosophy? And so that was one of the questions. And of course, Mike's answer was, well, the last guy had about as strong a leg as Jake. So really, we'll do the same thing. He made a 59-yarder. You're talking about Jake making 60-yarders. But I know I know we need to get into practice when we're starting to talk about how your kicker that was a question I was not expecting. But listen, Jake does have a strong leg. He had a bad day on Saturday, as Mike referenced, but he's got a cannon for a leg. He's probably pound for pound as strong as Janikowski's leg, because Janikowski probably outweighed him in his prime by 75 pounds. So, but Jake does have a strong leg. But anyway, yeah. So what the question was, do you just go ahead and say, hey, we only got to get the ball to the 45, up the plus 45 to kick it in the game field goal, or do we try to force it down to the? I understood the question. It was not. I'm kind of being facetious when I say we've gotten to the point now where we're asking about end of game scenarios in April with a kicker. I'm not making fun of the question. I'm just making fun of the fact that we don't have any more to ask.
But we are also at Florida State, where we have loved to talk about kickers since the late 80s, early 90s. And hey, I'll put a bow on it maybe by saying this, like, it's awesome that Mike Norvell used a scholarship to have Jake on the roster last year to learn from Ryan Fitzgerald, to where now he's ready to kind of hit the ground running as a somewhat experienced year two kicker. I mean, this may not be an issue with 105 scholarships moving forward. We may see multiple specialists out there down the road, but it was good to have Jake on the roster in 2024. So I think that can only help him.
Yeah, and listen, we did get one injury update in a positive light, and that is Squirrel White was back at practice. Now, the question I have, Bob, and you may not know, and I certainly do not know, but he did mention that this was a PCL strain, posterior collateral ligament. I think that's how you say it, posterior collateral ligament. Anyway, he mentioned that this was an injury suffered at Tennessee. Do we know, did Squirrel miss off-season conditioning because of that, and he's just now getting back, or was this something he aggravated in off-season conditioning? Does anybody know the answer to that question? I was glad that he's back, because he's going to be fun to watch in this offense.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer. I do know, checking up with the Tennessee Rivals site in the offseason, he was injured last year. He did miss some time. I can't remember how many games, how many snaps or whatnot. But yeah, he's obviously battled some injuries that have limited him here and there. But this is a guy that makes your wide receiver group look really, really different, especially in a room where, we can say it, Deuce Robinson has been electric early, has been injured somewhat now here in the middle. So I think you need an experienced guy who can be that kind of slot, that kind of go-to guy who is effective. And I think maybe without Squirrel, that's why they've been praising Javon Boggs, for example, because you put a guy like Javon out there in the slot and giving him some good reps.
Yep. Yeah. Well, listen, I'm glad. He's probably more forthcoming about his injury than the Florida State would probably like, but it was good to see that he's back and excited about being there. And somebody asked him about, I think you asked him about blocking, and he's definitely a willing blocker based on his answer. So
I was told he didn't block at Tennessee. That's kind of why I asked. I didn't exactly, maybe phrase it very well.
Right.
But I was told he really wasn't used as much of a blocker at Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, when your nickname Squirrel, your strong point is probably not going to be blocking. It's going to be getting out of the way of people and away from people. So yeah, that's I'm looking for. I don't need him to be strong. I need him to be squirrely. So hopefully we'll see that in the spring, in the fall. But yeah, good to get him back, because I do think he's got a chance to be one of Florida State's more exciting players on offense, particularly when you pair him with Deuce Robinson, who we've heard great things about, as you alluded to, and Castellanos, who we know is a dynamic playmaker. So, listen, like I said, after the scrimmage, the scrimmage was more about on offense who we didn't see as just as much as it was who we did. So that was interesting. But glad to see he's back. All right, so that's our practice report from Tuesday's practice. Some big news coming out. Obviously, the 2025 Hall of Fame, FSU Hall of Fame class. It was announced, and it includes Jameis Winston, Rashard Green, Brian Henry, who I believe is the head coach at Tallahassee State College and the son of Jim Henry. So, as you know, Jim has a history with the Osceola and Tallahassee Democrat, and obviously a Tallahassee guy from Tampa, but good guy. So happy for Jim and his family. National Softball Player of the Year, Lacey Waltrip. Olympian and 9-time All-American track star, Colleen Quigley. National champion diver, Terry Horner. And 3-time national champion track and field coach Bob Brayman. So, obviously, congratulations to all these people. Any of these, do you have any stories about any of these individuals? And are you surprised that maybe a Rashard Green got in over some guys that maybe were from the dynasty era that a guy like Dexter Carter, for example, who we're going to talk about his son, that he got in over maybe a Dexter Carter, and there's a ton of players from the dynasty era that deserve to be in the FSU Hall of Fame. But what's your takeaway from this Hall of Fame class?
Yeah, I think honestly they're all deserving, right? That's kind of easy,
Yep.
but the thing with Jameis is it must be a bye week or something. I think they've always tried to bring in NFL guys once they're retired or there's just an opening in their schedule. I really hope Jameis can make it back to enjoy that banquet. That's number one. Rashad, Rashad is incredibly professional. Just my memories of covering him are, yes, he's very, very quiet and wasn't great as far as describing his game and his development. But anytime you talked about Rashad, you asked Jimbo Fisher or the various assistant coaches, maybe in the preseason at media day, when we used to get them in the media day settings, say August, and then those bowl games, you kind of get that preseason and postseason feel of a guy like Rashad. Man, they loved him. They loved his work ethic. They loved how just professional he was. There wasn't any flaw to Rashad's game. I mean, I kind of think he should have been a really, really good pro just because there were no weaknesses there. But he didn't have that either high-end skill set either that just kind of made team after team want to put him out there. But Rashad is up there, probably one of my favorite guys to watch. And that game-winning touchdown up at Virginia Tech, I think in 2012, is up there for a guy like Rashad. But
I moved back towards Tallahassee towards the end of his career, and he was done. I was not saying, I want to be clear, I was not saying that Rashad did not deserve to be in. He just has not been gone from school a long time. He was one of my favorite Florida State players when I moved back to Tallahassee in 2013. I think he had a great year in 2013, if I recall correctly. But anyway, Rashad was always fun to watch. Of course, Jameis was always going to go in, and it was just a matter of time. Obviously, one of 3 Heisman Trophy winners. So, and I know a little bit about Brian. I was gone from Tallahassee when he played at Florida State. No, he was obviously an All-American, and the other names I'm kind of at a loss for. So, but congratulations to all of those folks. Obviously, the induction ceremony will take place on Friday, September 19th in the ballroom of the University Center. In addition to the formal introduction ceremony Friday night, they will also be introduced at the football game against the Kent State Flashes. I wish they'd do that for a bigger game. The Hall of Fame weekend, I would put with one of your marquee games, right? When it's going to be sold out and, you got more than 50,000 people in the stands. But anyway, that's what it is. That's the way it is. All right. So, Bob, anything else we need to know before we turn to Kurt and talk about the baseball Knowles? Any other tidbits of information?
Yeah, I think on the football front, we've kind of hit on a lot of it again. Practice Thursday, practice Friday, a little bit of a different schedule this week, but yeah, look forward to coverage from the Osceola as we'll have notes and news on Thursday and Friday night.
All right, Bob, we appreciate it, man, and we will see you later in the week. And we're going to bring in Kurt Weiler straight from hanging out with some of the Florida basketball team in Gainesville, which we're going to let Kurt tell us how that went down. But we're going to let Kurt in right now. Kurt, welcome back to town. Oh, Kurt, your mic's not working. Your mic's not working. All right. So Kurt's going to get his mic fixed, I think, and hopefully talk to us a little bit about baseball. Let me see if we can kick you out, Kurt, and bring you back in, see if that helps. Yeah, it's still not there. All right, so Kurt, what we're going to do while you get your mic fixed, I think Nick's in the background. We're going to bring Nick in and talk a little bit of recruiting. Well, we still can't hear you, Kurt. So let us know if you get that resolved, or we'll check back in a second. All right, Nick, you're getting called up early, buddy. You're getting called up early. This is why I asked to have everybody in the bullpen, because you never know when somebody's arm's going to go out, or Mike. So all right, Kurt. See, I even got my notes. Nick, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right.
I can hear you. We're good to go. We're good to go. Yeah.
Apologies for technical difficulties, of course.
We can hear Nick. All right. But we got one more question about football. Pete the Greek, who I know Pete. Hey, Pete, thanks for listening. Thank you, Trenton, for listening for the question. Based on Coach Norvell's updates, you all think he uses portal to help add depth to this roster. Does not appear to be happy with the performance of this team. He certainly wasn't happy with the performance of the team on Tuesday, Pete. I think that they would be very position specific in the portal. Like, I do not think they'll go after another offensive lineman. I could see them dipping in for a tight end. I've said that since they signed. I think it's going to be hard for Chase Lofton, even as much good coverage as he is getting, to be much more of a factor. I don't think he's going to be a big factor in the run game. I think he'd be pass specific. Now, can Landon and Randy Pittman get the job done, and Marquiston from a blocking standpoint? You would hope that those three guys can, but Randy's not very big. He's about 225. So I think I've said all along that I could see them going for a tight end. Now, listen. A lot of people think the portal is going to be out of control this spring. We heard the same thing last spring. We'll see what happens. I think if a player is good enough at any position, you go get him if you have room. But we all know that everybody's got to make way for the 105 come fall. And we already, and by our math, Florida State is already over. So I think that you could see them go there. I think the defensive line, they feel good about with the transfers. I think they really feel good about the secondary. They've talked about the size, speed, and length, Pete. But I would say, I've always said, if I was them and I could find a starting caliber linebacker in the portal in the spring, I would go get another linebacker, because I am still not convinced of that room. So I could see that if I just, of course, I'm not Mike Norvell nor anybody on that staff, but I could see them. If a player is good enough at any position that surprises them by being in the portal and they can get him, go get him. But the two positions that I would look at specifically are tight end and linebacker. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think tight end and linebacker is a good shout there. They didn't really lose a lot at other positions, especially in the fall window. I mean, had there been a jailbreak with the defensive backs, like we felt like there might be heading into that fall window, then maybe you consider bringing in a defensive back. But and I think it's important to note that maybe some of the frustration from the past few days leads from the fact that there are seemingly a lot more kids that are injured this spring, and you're getting a lot of those younger guys that are not only are they learning their installs, but they're learning how to be a football player at this level and do things the right way with this new coaching staff. So even though maybe Norvell certainly wasn't happy with the practice on Tuesday, I think it's important to note that there are a lot of young guys in there. But in terms of the portal, I think if they add anywhere, I think it's probably going to be tight end more than linebacker.
Yeah. But that's where I see them. And again, I think that if you can, if somebody surprises them, if you get I mean, name a great player. The freshman defensive end from South Carolina jumps in the portal late, and of course he's just signed a $multi-million deal with them in the offseason, so I don't think he's leaving. But if it's that kind of kid, you got to go after him just like you would do in the high school ranks. And listen, but I do think it wouldn't be bad to look at a tight end if you could, particularly an all-purpose tight end, and that means one that can catch as well as he can block, because I think that was one of the things that hurt FSU's offense last year. And they've got one true blocker in that room, and that's Marquiston. Pittman's more of a pass catcher, as is Chase. Now, Landon Thomas certainly has the size and strength and the frame to grow into an all-purpose tight end. So, and a lot of that could be predicated on what they think he's going to turn out to be by the time they get to August 30th in Alabama. All right. So, Nick, a lot going on in recruiting yesterday, and we're going to start. And I don't know that he was at practice, but I know you talked to him. You got some news on Davron Deuce Gerald, the four-star defensive tackle from Swanee, Georgia. Sounds like Florida State is kind of making a push there. So without giving your whole story away, which people can go to theosceola.com to read, or floridastate.rivals.com, just kind of give us some quick bullet points, and then our listeners and subscribers can go read what you wrote, what he told you, but kind of what was what has gotten Florida State back in the picture with Deuce.
Well, really, it's a simple answer, and that's Mike Norvell. Deuce was at practice yesterday. He snuck in the back after a bunch of the recruits walked in prior to practice, and this was his second time back in around 2 weeks. He was here for the Legacy Weekend on March 22nd. Look, it's a simple answer. Mike Norvell is responsible really for Florida State's rise in his recruitment. Norvell was the one who visited at Collins Hill all the way back in January. And that really kind of got the ball rolling here to where, Florida State wasn't really involved with Deuce much prior. So it's Norvell that has kind of, you see this every now and again where a coach kind of takes the personal reins of a prospect. That's what Norvell has done here. And it's resulted in Florida State really becoming a player in this recruitment and, really cementing themselves squarely in the mix. And there's a lot of programs that he's considering, a lot of really good programs, Ohio State, Ole Miss, Miami. I mean, he's the number 2 defensive tackle, according to Rivals currently. And obviously they now do these rankings updates every month. So there's a little bit less of a shelf life in that, but still such a ginormous prospect, a really good looking kid on the field. And this is an important one because, as we kind of talked about with another defensive tackle last week with Kendall Guerville, they need to get in on some of those really, really highly rated tackles in the local areas.
Yeah, and as Nick alluded to, it's an impressive list of schools he's considering. Besides Florida State, obviously impressive in their own right. You got Clemson, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia Tech, LSU, Oklahoma, Miami, and Ole Miss, all among his leaders right now. And probably the unfortunate thing is, it may work out in Florida State's favor, but not all 10 of those schools are going to get official visits. Now, they have unlimited official visits. And listen, if I'm a kid, why not take 10? I mean, you can take one during your 4 during your season. If you take 6 in the summer or 4 in the summer, you can take some during the season. But anyway, it's going to be a competitive recruitment. There's no doubt about that. And as I say this qualified every week, I think with some of these bigger name prospects and guys that are highly sought after, what happens on the field this fall is going to impact whether they get these kids on campus for an official visit or whether they get them to the finish line. I think that's going to have a huge impact on some of these bigger name guys. So, but if you can read that story, Nick's got it up. He put it up about an hour ago. So you can go to theosceola.com. I know our man Asher was at practice. I don't think we talked to him, but Asher Giotto, I know that you're a huge fan, and I know he posted a picture of being at practice. And of course, listen, that kid's going to have a scholarship from every school on the planet by the time he's done. And listen, the one thing that stood out to me about Asher was his picture with Terrence Knighton, and Terrence is a big human being. Asher is taller than Terrence. towers over him to some extent. I was shocked, and the kid's a rising sophomore. That kid's going to be large. He
6'5", 235, I think he was, something like that. I mean, you take a look at, and the term is college ready bodies, for him to have a college ready body as a rising sophomore. I don't know necessarily that it's specifically college ready, but he's got an impressive frame for being how young he is.
Well, he's on his way to looking like Myles Garrett when he's Myles Garrett's age. I mean, that's what he's looking. I mean, he's the white Myles Garrett is what he is what he's going to be. I mean, maybe not from a player standpoint, but his physique, he's long, he's thick. I mean, he's going to be listen, that kid's going to be able to sign anywhere he wants to sign.
Yeah. But anyway. I did talk to him briefly, actually, on campus. It just wasn't anything relatively new that we didn't already know. Having been able to speak with sources about his recruitment down in Miami, really the point of the visit was for him to kind of see more of the scheme that he likes so much about Florida State in action, and he was able to do that yesterday. So,
and the good news is that kid has turned into a regular on campus. Now, what I am going to say to everyone that'll listen about Asher, at some point, Asher, who's been doing this since before he was a freshman, going to all these colleges, at some point, he's probably going to get tired of taking all these trips. So don't freak out when he's not on campus every 3 months like he has been for the last year. But anyway, that we don't talk about many 2028s. We hardly talk about 2027s. But that kid's impressive, and so I just wanted to mention.
Dude.
Yeah, he is a dude. That's right. He is. You got a good one there. I think he's transferring to IMG too, right?
At some point, I think it's in the cards. I asked him about it, and he said it was something that was going to happen down the road. I had the impression it was going to happen sooner than that, but obviously, I don't know if that's a sensitive, touchy subject going from one school to the other. But I mean, he's going to probably end up there eventually.
It's sticky if you're Bowles coach, and it's not if you're an IMG coach.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, speaking of getting on campus frequently, I mean, Bowles is 2.5, 3 hours. Obviously, it's the Jacksonville area, so it's good that he's showing up on campus frequently. And,
I'm just disappointed he didn't have Corbin Fordham in tow with him. That's the kid I want to see for Styles. For Bowles get over here. All right, so Devin Carter was back on campus again for the second time in about 2 weeks. And I read earlier today somewhere that he's going to be back on campus Saturday. He's committed to Auburn, told you that he is still firmly committed to Auburn. What is your read on this? I'm glad that he's given, I guess, FSU the seal of approval, that he's seeing improvement, and that's means something to him. I don't know how much a 17-year-old kid can see improvement from one practice to the next. But anyway, Devin Carter, what do you make of his recruitment?
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting quote that he gave where he said, his his reason for visiting is that he wanted to see the growth in between practices. And it's like, that's not really something that you hear too often. So either that was a little bit of a brush off in terms of why he actually wanted to come back, or I don't know. But in terms of, his recruitment overall, I think Florida State has done a tremendous job getting back into this one. It's no secret, the ties that he has here and what he thinks of the program, especially Mike Norvell in particular. It's really all about continuing to build the relationships between him and new wide receiver coach Tim Harris, in my opinion. The only other school that he has an official visit to is Auburn, who of course he's committed to. So, Florida State has done a really good job of putting themselves in a position to flip him here. Now, whether or not that happens, obviously there's a long way to go to find out, but it's purely Auburn versus Florida State right now. I think the last time he was here, he mentioned maybe Ole Miss was getting into the swing of things, but he did not say that he had set an official visit to Ole Miss and just the 2 official visits to Florida State and Auburn.
Yeah, listen, I think he's one of those kids that I don't think Florida State's going to flip him unless they win a bunch of ball games. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, that's how they're going to get in there with him. Listen, I think this is going to be one of those more dramatic recruitments for whatever reason. It's just my read on the thing. But he's already been committed here, decommitted, committed to Auburn, now coming here 3 times in 3 weeks. He's probably not really committed to Auburn if he's doing all that. So anyway, interesting thing. But we'll see what happens with it. But yeah, he said that, obviously he mentioned that his dad is tied to the university and all of that. But anyway, I think this one's going to be interesting till the end. And listen, we'll see what happens. But this one's going to be this one will be full of twists and turns, I think. All right, so we got another question. Does arriving in a helicopter really impress a player or help recruit to win someone over? Well, this is from Billy. Billy, listen, I think sometimes the coaches do it for much for their own egos as they do for anybody else's. Now, I think you got a lot of money invested in football recruiting. It does get them from campus to campus, especially if Mike wants to land in Tampa and hit a bunch of high schools in Tampa, Sarasota, Fort Myers, or cross the state sideways and go to Polk County, then over into the Orlando area. So there is an operational reason why they do it. Do I think some kids, because what they're going to say when they're 50, when they're my age, they're going to say, I remember in 2025 when Mike Norvell helicoptered into my high school to visit with me. So yes, it does make an impression, but all the major schools do it. FSU does it. You can if you follow Kirby Smart at Georgia, he does it. Kalen DeBoer is doing it. Billy Napier's doing it. So it only matters if the kid likes the school would be the best way I could put it. Do it because they all cancel each other out, but certainly it helps a kid puff out his chest in the hallway. Mike Norvell and Kirby Smart helicopter onto the football field to see me. Yes, I think it helps to a certain degree, and I don't think the kids, and they don't have to, they're not worried about it, but I think it makes it operationally feasible for Mike to get to as many kids as he can and any other college coach. But so I do think to a certain extent, the helicopter, as impressive as it is, but once you've seen it happen with 30 different schools, it kind of loses its luster. So I think it just matters on how a kid feels about that particular school that coach is from. So that would be my answer on the helicopter. And some of these kids don't even know how they got there. Right there in class, they don't have any idea that Mike Norvell just landed in a helicopter, or Kirby Smart, or anybody else. All right, so Demarius Yates, 4-star running back Demarius Yates, first visit. He was committed to Florida State. Has a relationship with Gus Malzahn, I believe. What was y'all's take on Bob? If you want to, I know you you might have done the interview, so if you want to pop back in, that's fine. But what was your takeaway from Demarius Yates, the running back from Kemper County, Georgia, and former high school teammate of Mario Nash Jr.?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Yates has not been on campus in a while, and really he hasn't had a chance to be able to kind of build that rapport with some of the new coaching staff on the offensive side of the ball, being, of course, Gus Malzahn. And I think really this visit was about him making sure or testing to see, what's changed, what hasn't changed. I'm not terribly sure that this moved the needle either which way for him or both sides, to be honest with you. I don't know where he sits on the board, but I think in terms of kind of, I guess, keeping the water warm in terms of a prospect that has had interest in you in the past and seems to be kind of in a middle ground in his recruitment since decommitting from Mississippi State.
Yep. All right. Well, you talked to a offensive lineman, Hayden Ainsworth. He's reclassified to 2026. He's just 15 years old, so he could be 16 by the time he gets here. I don't know how crazy I am about that on the offensive line. I didn't know he was just 15. That would kind of scare me away if I was any college, and I will have to do myself the service of going and watching this kid's film because there are exceptions to every rule. But what was your takeaway? Why did Hayden tell you he reclassified, and where does Florida sit with Hayden Ainsworth, the 4-star? He's still, I guess does 4-star just transfer over? Or do they have to re-rank him?
I think they re-ranked him. I don't think he was ranked anything yet because he was a 2027 kid. But
right now, he's ranked the 48th best offensive tackle in the class of 2026. What's your take on his recruitment with Florida State?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I was a little bit surprised to hear he was that young, and of course, maybe he's got a birthday coming up and he's going to turn 16 soon. I didn't quite go that far to ask him the personal details, of course, but look, this is a kid that really excels in the classroom, so he's been eligible for college for a while. He's passed ACTs and all the other things that you need to do on the academic side to be able to enroll in a college university. And he started getting some offers towards the end of January that kind of enforced his decision to make that jump up to the next class. And I think he was impressed with what Herb presented and offered him in terms of his coaching ability, and he was really, really impressed with the hospitality that Florida State displayed when he came on his visit. They spent pretty much the whole day there. They stayed a couple of hours after practice. I think they left at like 3:30, and that was, of course, after a morning practice. So he spent the entire day at Florida State on Saturday. And I think another thing that's important with him is that he's seeing all of the how much Florida State is recruiting offensive linemen and the emphasis that's now being put on getting a bunch of young offensive linemen in, and that's something that's pretty attractive for him. So this is one to monitor moving forward. He's going to take an official visit at some point. He did tell me. So yeah, he's kind of another one of those offensive linemen that's kind of come out of nowhere for Florida State that Herb's working his butt off to recruit.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. They also had Zyke Hilton on campus last Saturday, and I finally got my article done. I'll sit down and listen to Zyke and what he had to say. And listen, I'm a big fan of Zyke Hilton. I got to see him at Rivals Camp. I believe it might have even been his freshman year. Certainly got to see him last year. I'm a fan of this kid because what he has done with his body. I don't know if anybody knows this, but Zyke's probably about 280 pounds right now, 6'3", 280. He is a center. He said Florida State's going to recruit him as a center, and that's what they want him to play. What this kid has done to transform his body over the last 18 to 24 months is incredible. When he committed to Alabama as a nose tackle, he was over 350 pounds as a 10th grader. I mean, this kid has dedicated himself to getting in football shape and becoming a player. And I think I think Florida State's got a good shot. They're going to have to battle Bama, Florida, and Georgia. He mentioned one other. He said there were 5 and that Florida State is in that top 5. And to your point, why is you mentioned this with the other kid Deuce earlier. It was his relationship with Coach Norvell that has the Seminoles in the top 5 with Zyke Hilton. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. He's going to be on an official visit on June 13th. But he loved the high intensity of the practice. We've heard all these guys talk about that. So Zyke, listen, they're just chipping away at him, and looks like they're in a good spot with him. Anybody else, Nick, from practice yesterday? Any update on Caden Hall? I know he was at practice, and he was also on Fish's Baker's Dozen today. And I want to talk about a couple of kids on Fish's Baker's Dozen because I've got a couple of things that I disagree with on his Baker's Dozen. So let's talk about Caden Hall first.
Yeah, Caden is one of those guys that you really just like to get on campus as much as you can, being a Florida kid. Alabama is a huge threat in this recruitment, but of course, Caden Hall, growing up a Florida State fan, it was really a cool experience for him to be able to grow up a Florida State fan, be so heavily recruited by the Seminoles over the past year or so. Hard to believe that this would have been the first practice that he's seen in all the time that he's been recruited since last January, last March or something like that. But really good experience for him to be able to see the coaching staff do what they do. He had a lot of nice things to say about new safeties coach Evan Cooper in terms of the type of coach that he is. A down-to-earth guy, I believe, was the way that Hall described Cooper. But yeah, this is a recruitment that you would feel with the outside facts that being that he grew up a Florida State fan, he was a fan, and Florida State has had him on campus so many times. This recruitment that you feel like they would end up winning in the end, or you would hope that they would, and you just need to continue to get him back on campuses, which is what they're doing. And he should be back on campus next week as well.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yeah, well, listen, the more they get here, the better chance you got to sign them, so that's good. All right, so let's talk about a kid they've only had on campus once. If he's been on campus yet, I can't remember, to be quite honest with you. And that is FSU quarterback target Landon Duckworth, Jackson High School in Jackson, Alabama. Obviously is going to be here for an official visit this summer. But Fish has him as a number one guy on his need to get board, and he feels like Florida State's got a legitimate shot. And he says they're in the game for his services until he pulls the trigger for another program. I think that's going to be great that they get an official visit out of Landon, but I think he is signing with an SEC school, and I do not even think there's any question about that. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when they first offered him, I felt really good that Florida State would have had a shot to land him considering the relationship that he had with Gus Malzahn. But here we are in April, and he hasn't found himself on Florida State's campus yet. And well, he's been to Ole Miss twice, I believe. So I think I mentioned it either in a show last week or maybe the 2 weeks before. But I think the worst case scenario here would be if he pulls an early commitment to Ole Miss, since he's trending that way so far. You get him on an official visit, I think you have a shot. I right now it's hard for me to see Duckworth choosing Florida State over some of the SEC schools that he's being pursued by. But as you and I have talked about on the show, QB dominoes are a funny thing. So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
I just think that I just don't think it's going to work out in the cards. I think they need more. Now listen, a great season can change everything. I will say that until December 5th or whatever time the kids sign in December. Now, a guy that I totally agree with Fish on is Jake Krull. Fish wrote, you may be able to find guys who are more physically impressive at defensive end. I doubt you can find many better. I agree. I think Jake is the real deal. So does Fish. I would argue he's the number one rated player in the state of Florida. Now, if the Fish is saying that, then that means he's going to be Fish's number one rated player in the state of Florida. I think that we could see that one coming. But what do you make of Florida State's chances? I think they're pretty good. I think it's going to be – I think this kid's going to continue to impress people as he gets into his senior year. How do you see his recruitment playing out as of April 9th, 2025?
I think it really – and from a Florida State perspective, I think it comes down to how much these new defensive coaches from Nebraska can really continue to bond with them. I think Florida State adding Tony and Coach Knighton changed the ball game in terms of how Krull viewed the Seminoles. I think he was interested in the Seminoles prior, but now I think they have a genuine shot of getting an official visit amongst a really nice list of suitors. So I'm not. When he was here earlier in the spring, I wasn't overly confident that they'd get an official visit. Right now, I feel like they probably will. I still don't consider them a favorite in the recruitment. But again, that's why it comes down to how well both Tony and Terrence can continue to build a relationship with Jake.
All right. Well, Nick, we could go through the whole list, but we're not, because I forgot we got to get Kurt back on the show. And he's sitting back there waiting to tell us about who he hung out with on Tuesday night in Gainesville. So stay here, Nick, because if he can't speak to us, you're staying on the show. We're going to talk more about this list. But let's see if we can get Kurt on here. Kurt, are you there?
It was working pre-show. I don't know what happened.
All right, Nick, you can leave now.
I don't know.
Let's see you on Friday.
Nice wave as they send me to the gallows or whatever.
You got the pageant wave. You're already ready for springtime Tallahassee, buddy. You've got the light bulb pageant wave, like you're screwing in a light bulb. You look like Queen Elizabeth.
Yes.
I'm talking about the wave, not facially.
Thanks. I couldn't guess that. All right, fellas.
All right, see you, Nick. All right, Kurt, welcome to the show. Finally, an hour and 2 minutes later. All right, so I know that you've been waiting a long time and you've probably got other stuff to do, so we're going to make this quick. All right, so Kurt was over in Gainesville for the baseball game on Tuesday night. Listen, that's the first time I'd been to their old stadium. That's the first time I seen the new stadium. It's nice. What did you think of the Adirondack seating in the outfield from where you were staying? I mean, is that?
Oh yeah, the chairs out there. I mean, honestly, I think they did a good job with. I mean, it's kind of. I think they kind of went the minor league stadium approach of like having a big concourse where you can see the field from anywhere in the concourse where you're walking around and the different ways of seating out there. I mean, I will say, and I get it. Florida is 111 in SEC. The crowd was disappointing. Like for a rivalry with the series on the line, like it for a 7 p.m. national TV game, it might be generous to say 2/3 of the seats were full. Like, I mean, like I know things have not been going well for Florida, but it was a disappointing showing from that fan base. But I mean, obviously, it was enough to get the win. I don't know if that made the difference in the result, but obviously, another tough one and maybe a bit of a different way for Florida State.
Yeah, well, listen, we said before the game that nothing would make you feel better coming off 2 losses at Wake Forest and going down to Gainesville and beating Florida, and came up just short. What went right for Florida State in that game, Kurt, and what went wrong?
You knew it was going to be tough as another bullpen game, and they've kind of all been bullpen games, and it definitely felt like it was going a certain way early, especially, I mean, Brady Lauk 3 walks in the second inning and somehow got out of it with a lucky bounce. 7 walks in the game over 8 innings is definitely still a little high. You don't want a walk an inning, basically. It's kind of not sustainable, but it did feel like, I mean, they found something on the mound for the most part of, I mean, that was an entire bullpen game, and they did piece something together with kind of the core guys they had. I don't know if anybody had kind of their best stuff, but for the most part, they made it work. I mean, pitching wise, you would have thought 5 runs going into that game, if they held them to 5, would have been enough for the offense. I mean, it really, to me, came down to, you don't want to boil it down to one moment. It came down to Mason Martinez allowing that home run. I mean, he's up 0-2 on Brendan Lawson with two men on and 2 outs, and hung a pitch and looked like maybe a slider that just didn't break nearly enough. And Brendan Lawson did not miss it and hit out for a 3-run homer when it broke a 2-2 tie. They end up winning 5-4. But to me, really, I mean, it's the offense is what I come away more concerned with. I mean, we saw again facing, I mean, the best pitching staff they probably have all season over the weekend. We kind of saw the offense was able to get some hits, but sort of struggled to get the big hit, struggled to come through with like a string of hits in a row and kind of a putting up a crooked number of like a multi-run inning. And I mean, we saw that again on Tuesday I mean, they were 1 for 10 with runners in scoring position. I think they had 5 hits in their first 2+ innings. Like to start the third, I think they had 2 more hits. They got them to 5. And then over the last 7 innings, they had 3 hits. They struck out 12 times. They had every chance to come through with that big hit and just never could get, I mean, they never led in the game. They just never had that big hit in the big moment that kind of allowed them. Because like the truth is, I thought going in with how Florida's been struggling. I mean, Florida, it would take a ridiculously strong close for Florida to make the NCAA tournament. They look in that regard dead. I think they'd have to win 12 of their last 18 SEC games, and that's hard with the schedule they have.
Yep.
But yep. I thought if you can get up early on them, you're going to kind of test the resolve of that team. How much is that team on quit watch? And I thought they could have been, but Florida State was never able to get ahead and really test that team's resolve. I mean, Florida was ahead almost all night.
Yeah. Listen, I was hoping they'd pull it out. I was hoping it'd be just like we get a 9th inning home run like they did in Jacksonville. How concerned are you as this team on a 3-game losing streak, as you mentioned in your post-game article? First time they've lost 3 games this year in a row this year. Getting ready to head to a Virginia Tech team that swept Wake Forest in their series with them, is 7th in batting average in the conference, and maybe more importantly, 5th in ERA, ahead of Florida State and directly behind North Carolina, Wake Forest, Clemson, and Georgia Tech and Clemson. Of course, North Carolina is decidedly better from an ERA standpoint than any other pitching staff. It's almost a full point difference than Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, Clemson, Virginia Tech, and Florida State. But what do you make of, I mean, I'm not going to make a rhetorical statement like how important is this series, but they've got to get the wheels back on the bus, and how big a challenge, because I think the casual college baseball fan, which I guess I kind of fall into, would think, oh, well, they're going to Virginia Tech, they're going to come back with 3 wins.
My advice to any casual college baseball fan is you can never assume a sweep, especially a sweep on the road. And I mean, that's a ranked Virginia Tech team. So yeah, I think you knew they went 29 games where over the first 29 games, they were 25-4. They never lost consecutive games. With how college baseball works, with the fact that, I mean, a valley was going to always come at some point. I mean, they were on kind of a heck of a peak, if you will, and there was always going to be a valley at some point. And it's kind of unfortunate that the pitching valley kind of hit at the same time as the hitting valley. It's, in a way, you can kind of say the whole team's been slumping a bit in the last 3 games. And I mean, the question for me that will need to be answered, and we'll get some answers on over the rest of the schedule, because they have not had the hardest schedule to date. That with that Wake series really starts to pick up. I mean, Virginia Tech's a ranked team. Virginia, I don't know if they're ranked yet, but they went through some struggles. They were the preseason number 2 team in the country, and they've really rounded into form. I mean, Clemson looks like the ACC front runner at the moment. UNC was a preseason ranked team. A road trip to Cal's no joke. Louisville's better than expected. I mean, every team the rest of the way. And my question for this team is really at the plate, how can they handle good pitching? Because the early returns on kind of the better pitching staffs they faced, Wake and Florida, haven't been great, if we're being honest. I mean, is there a case to be made for the more they go against top-tier pitching, the better they can get? Right. Sure. But there's also it feels like right now there's a bit of a book out that they'll have to adjust to. I mean, they're striking out a lot. And I think that to me is the biggest thing, because we've seen, I mean, this offense can mash. They mashed a lot against the lesser teams on their schedule, but now they're going to need to, because with how the pitching staff looked and with some of the top level offenses in the league, you're going to have to win some slugfest. Even if the pitching finds it a bit, you're just not going to shut down ACC offenses every game. So I think the big thing to me is, what can the offense do against the better teams? I mean, they get another chance this weekend, I think, and then a lot of the next few against Clemson, against Virginia, against North Carolina. Like you said, they lead the league in ERA. So I think you've got a lot of that you need to work through for sure, because it can't be the Alex Lodi show all year.
And they'll get challenged because Virginia Tech is 5th in the conference in strikeouts with 322 as a staff, directly behind Georgia Tech and in front of Miami. So we'll be interested. We start breaking it down from a statistical standpoint. It certainly looks like it's going to be a challenging weekend. All right. So we will have Kurt and Bob will have baseball coverage this weekend, and of course we'll might do a little bit more of a preview on Friday if we're not talking about football the whole time. But let's talk a little bit about your Tuesday night in Gainesville, Kurt. You don't ever know who you're going to run into in Gainesville, Florida. I remember being back in college at 2020. Not 2020. What the hell am I talking about? 1990 something. And working into the Purple Porpoise after a Florida State baseball game. And this guy taps me on the back of the shoulder, and I turn around and look up, and there's this towering, handsome black man named Kevin Carter staring down at me. So you always run into famous people in Gainesville. He was All-American defensive end at the time. You were at Miller's Ale House? Is that where you were?
Yeah, I went to Miller's with a few other guys from Florida on the Florida State beat who traveled down after the game, and we're there for a while. And they close it. They were closing at midnight, and literally right before midnight, who else walks in and starts sitting at a table? And I wonder if they didn't seem to want a ton of attention. I hope they thought they could be incognito. Was Walter Clayton and Elijah Martin and a few other members of the Florida basketball team that just won a national title the night before, literally 24 hours prior.
They probably would have been more discreet if they hadn't worn their basketball uniforms to the bar.
Well, they didn't do that, but yeah, they seemed nice enough. They got a round of applause when people noticed. A few came over and took pictures. They didn't seem thrilled about it, but they did it. And then I think they might have got left alone. But I was surprised. I mean, it's pretty surprising to see them walk into Miller's 24 hours after they won a national title.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be the spot I would expect to see them 24 hours after the game. I would with college barish. Now I don't know where Miller's.
Again, I think they wanted to be left alone. I think they wanted to unwind and decompress. I don't think they.
So you think they were going there because they thought it'd be more adultish and people would kind of let them do their thing?
Yeah,
I get it. All right. Well, Kurt, we appreciate the info. Appreciate you waiting on us. If you're not a subscriber to the Osceola YouTube channel, we wish that you, before you leave this today, if you're listening via YouTube, subscribe to the Osceola YouTube channel. Hit the notification button so that you get alerted when we do these shows, both live and or taped. Sometimes they're taped live, which is an old reference to the Larry Sanders Show. I don't know if anybody on there has watched the Larry Sanders Show back in the day. But anyway, also, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com to check out all of our coverage of FSU spring practice, the baseball program. Nick's got a ton of recruiting stories on the front page from practice yesterday, and we also have video of Mike Norvell, Squirrel White, and also our practice report. So you can go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com and check us out. And while you're there, we would love for you to go ahead and subscribe. We think that you'll like the content. And listen, you can get the more information you have, the more knowledge you have, and we've got good information. And we hope that you would subscribe to the Osceola and give us a chance to see what information we can provide you. You can't have enough information, so go ahead and subscribe to every service that covers Florida State for all I care. But basically, subscribe to the Osceola, Kurt, is what I'm trying to tell everybody. All right, so we'll be back on Friday at 3 o'clock as the schedule still stands, and we will have coverage of FSU spring practice number 11. There may be some more basketball news. I know they got another transfer out of Florida Southern the other day, so we'll get you updated on that as well. But we want to thank you for joining us. For Kurt, Bob, and Nick, I am Pat, and we will see you on Friday at 3 p.m. Thanks for tuning in.